Hello and welcome to tonight's webinar, Navigating the Education System with Marfan and Loeys-Dietz syndromes. It can be a tricky and tortuous path, as you all probably know, but here to guide and advise us is wonderful occupational therapist Natasha Woodgate, who's especially qualified as she has Marfan syndrome herself. Natasha will speak for a short while before taking your questions, of which there may be many, and to ask your questions, feel free to raise your hand or just pop your query into the chat feed, either works. All that is left for me to say is please remain muted for optimal sound quality, unless you're speaking, of course, and we are recording this webinar. Welcome, Natasha.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you all. I just thought I'd do like a mini presentation at the beginning, just for me, more than anything else, just to give us a bit of structure while we go through. I'll give me some structure while we're going through it, because I've got so much information. I'll just go off at different lots of tangents. So I thought I'd start with this and we'll go from there. So disclaimer, you always have to disclaim it. Just to let you know, any information shared today is just for general guidance and support from an OT perspective. It's not a substitute for individual assessment or professional advice tailored to your child's specific needs. So I thought I'd start out with what is occupational therapy, because nobody knows what occupational therapy is, not even occupational therapists much of the time. So the definition of occupational therapy is all about helping people do the everyday things that matter to them most, things like attending to their personal care, going to school, playing, working, or simply enjoying hobbies. So in this case, occupation is basically the term used for everyday activities people want, need, or expected to do. So as an OT, we abbreviate it to OT, I work with individuals of all ages who might be experiencing illness, disability, injury, or other challenges that make these daily tasks difficult. So we're very much focused on what people can do, not what they can't, and then find ways to build on their strengths, remove those barriers, and use strategies or adapt the environment so they can live as independently and fully as possible. So occupational therapy is about unlocking potential and improving quality of life in the most practical and person-centered way. And that's what I love about OT. It's incredibly practical. It's about getting people to do things they want to do things they love, and using that as a therapy to unlock their potential, and person-centered. We know that Marfan syndrome is a broad spectrum. It affects many different people in many different ways. We can't pigeonhole, that's a Marfan patient, we do it this way. We have to look at that individual person. How does it affect that person? How can we adjust that for that person? So who am I? I qualified as an occupational therapist in 2003. I've covered a lot of different areas. I started out in mental health rehab. I ended up in a special needs school and college working with children, very much around access to education, as well as equipment and adaptations. I then worked for the children's disability team. So that was children aged 0 to 19, the local authority. And I worked alongside architects and surveyors looking at equipment and major adaptations. So we designed properties. I then had a little break while I had my children. And then I went back to the joint community rehab team. So that's people post-hospital discharge, getting them back to being, once they've been discharged, visiting them in their homes, getting them back to the level they want to be. And then most recently, I'm in private practice, which I work with adults and children. And basically, I use all the skills I've developed over the years to provide occupational therapy to people. So I have Marfan syndrome, which if you read my story, and I've navigated schools as a parent. I have 2 children, both of which also have Marfan syndrome. So I do have first-hand experience of working with primary and secondary schools. This is very dry, but I think it's really important to cover. Marfan syndrome is such an invisible illness for many people, and generally children with Marfan syndrome, they don't disrupt lessons, they don't cause problems, they get on with their work, and they are the ones that unfortunately are quite often missed. And so the same importance is not put by the teaching staff sometimes in helping those children. So as a parent, when you're going forward saying, my children needs help, support, it's really handy to know about the legislation behind it. So there's 2 bits of legislation. I'll run through it quickly because it is very dry. But Section 100 of the Children's and Families Act, pupils at school with medical conditions should be properly supported so they have full access to education, including school trips and PE. Governing bodies must ensure that arrangements are in place to schools to support pupils with medical conditions, and governing bodies should ensure that school leaders consult health and social care professionals, pupils and parents to ensure that the needs of children with medical conditions are properly understood and effectively supported. And the second bit is the Equality Act 2010. Schools are legally required to make reasonable adjustments. My favourite term when I go to schools, reasonable adjustments. Nobody can disagree with reasonable adjustments because they're reasonable adjustments, to ensure that disabled pupils are not placed at substantial disadvantage compared to their peers. This includes pupils with medical conditions that meet the Act's definition of a disability, conditions that have a substantial and long-term adverse on a person's ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities, which is many of our Marfan children. And the Act mandates that the schools must not discriminate against disabled people because of something arising from their disability, ensuring they have equal access to education and associated services. They're the important ones to know. So the other two things we need to about, how do we get schools to implement strategies to help our children with Marfan syndrome? Most people know about the EHCP. So this is the Educational Health and Care Plan. So this is children with significant additional needs that cannot be met with the usual support available in school or college. The local authority have to decide whether to assess and then whether to approve at the end of the assessment. It involves many different professional assessments. It's a long process and it's a legally binding document. So the school healthcare plan, this is a plan that happens at school, making staff to know what to do, especially emergencies, helping the child participate fully in school life, including trips and activities. It includes details like the medical condition, how it affects them at school, what medication or treatments they need, who are given to them, emergency procedures, and importantly, any adjustments needed, such as rest breaks, quiet spaces, flexible PE. We will go into that in a bit. And the other thing is it can be written by a school nurse, SENCO, and parent. So this is something you can have a large amount of input into. I think quite often schools focus it very medicalised around what's the medication, when do they take it? But you can add much, much more into that to support the child. So it's the one that I've used with my children to ensure they got the support they need and needed at school. It is not legally binding though, unfortunately. So common difficulties with children with Marfan syndrome. I thought it'd be useful to split it into three parts because obviously Marfan affects the joints, your eyes and your heart. So I thought we start with joints. What I'll try and do is read through it. I'm sure we'll get to the questions and answers. We will go back to this. But just saying how OT can help with this. So joint hypermobility causes pain, fatigue and instability. So it's really important for Marfan children to, if we go right back to the beginning, to have really good seating, good supportive seating, to have their feet supported, so it might be a footrest, to have a chair with arms on it, to have a desk, and obviously a lot of the Marfan children can be very tall. Schools aren't very good at having particularly ergonomic desks and chairs. And I've even been to secondary schools where a 6'4" 14-year-old was literally on a small desk because that's what they have for everyone. So we need to be fighting for that because that makes a massive difference to a child's fatigue. If you're having to fight all day long to keep your body upright and stable, that's causing you pain, that's causing you fatigue, and it does not encourage you to engage with your education. One of the things somebody I've talked to recently was about their child being kept in for breaks because their handwriting wasn't good. We'll get to handwriting in a minute. It's really important Marfan children have breaks. In fact, they should need more breaks than they get given anyway. But it's something to emphasise to teaching staff. Regular positioning movement breaks are really important. One of the things that I've suggested for lots of pupils is that you can get these full line body bean bags. When it was my son's reading time, they got him one of those and he would lay on that and just let his whole body rest. When you're laying on a bean bag, all your body, it's one of the long ones, your body is supported. This is giving your body a chance to rest. And you'll find that even 5 to 10 minutes on that bean bag makes a massive difference. He would do it when they had their reading time. So it wasn't a case of he was being, it was something he was being taken out the classroom for. They would just try and incorporate it in there as part of the day. Obviously, he was in primary when he did this. Secondary, it's a bit different. But laying down and giving your body a chance just to recover is a massive thing for encouraging you to have more engagement long term. So difficulty sitting for long periods due to poor postural support, grip and fine motor challenges affecting writing and using tools. This is a big one. So from an OT perspective, handwriting comes from the core. If you haven't got a strong core, that means you haven't got a strong shoulder girdle, which means you will struggle with handwriting. So even those schools, understandably, they're not OTs, will focus on handwriting, and they get very upset when children don't have nice handwriting. If that child doesn't have a strong core, which many Marfan syndrome children don't, they won't have the strong shoulder girdle and they won't be able to write, however much practicing they do. So it's about making sure schools are supporting children to build up that internal strength, and something we can do as parents at home as well, and then get to the handwriting. The other thing with handwriting is about using the right implements. So using pens and pencils that are fatter. Even I today was using a small, like Bic pencil to make my notes, and I was suddenly thinking, why is my hand hurting? It's because I was using too small pencil, and I don't know if you can see this. My mum bought me this for Christmas, but it's a lovely fat pen, and I use that, and my hand doesn't hurt. So it's just simple little things we can change around that for our children and for us that make a big difference. Use of computers for exams. We're looking at secondary school children especially. 2-hour exams can be 2 hours long, writing English essays. If you have a computer, they can use that instead, less strain on the joints. They can use a dictation program instead, maybe. It's just all about finding the way for them to access the education and get the best out of it they can. Struggles, so with stairs, PE, heavy backpacks may worsen joint strain. So for our children, we're looking at especially secondary school, where they're moving from classroom to classroom, making sure they've got a locker that's centrally located, so they're not having to carry around loads of books. So can we make sure that that's there, and the books can be decanted into there, so they're not having to do that. Making sure their classrooms are on one level or within a small area, so they're not having to walk as much. Then we got to pain and fatigue can affect concentration and task persistence. So can the child easily get access to pain medication when needed? And then, of course, we look at the mental health issues from this as well. So many may experience anxiety or low self-esteem from physical limitations. It's not nice to be different from your peers, from your classmates. And it's about making sure any of these changes we do are not big, obvious things that point them out as being different, because kids don't like that. And then risk of dislocations or subluxations in fingers, shoulders and knees. And then we go on to heart. So again, fatigue and reduced stamina due to heart complications. So I find with my clients and with my children, the best way is to have some very clear guidelines with the teachers, what they can and can't do in regards to PE. It just makes life easier and clearer. So we've got, with my children, they don't do athletics, they don't do football, but they do badminton and they do other bits that are less stressful that they know their bodies can do. And that's what I mean about it being very individualized for your child. Some children, that's fine. Other children, it's not. But I find by putting very clear guidelines in that school healthcare plan makes it much easier for everyone to follow. And then we've got risk of exclusion or feeling different again. Frequent medical appointments can impact attendance. Anxiety about heart health may affect focus and confidence. And then the other thing is sensitivity to heat or long periods of standing. Today, funnily enough, my child had to stand outside of a classroom for a while and she fainted because when she's currently growing a lot, her blood pressure likes to drop out and her blood pools, and she collapsed. The school know this, but unfortunately it happened. But this is what we have to be aware of, is setting those guidelines that for other children, they might be all right standing outside a classroom for 5-10 minutes. But for a child with Marfan syndrome, that's not good enough and they can't do that. So that's a battle I'm going to face tomorrow. Eyes. So myopia, which severe short-sightedness, lens dislocation, light sensitivity. So it's not a case of just make sure they're close to the board as possible, because it's about how the light affects, the glare affects You need to go in there and perhaps as a parent go in there when the teacher and say, look, this is the best position for my child to be able to see from your board and understand. Frequent eye fatigue or headaches from focusing. So again, looking at lots of breaks, so you're not constantly having to concentrate, which then increases the headache risk. Difficulty reading and copying text quickly. Again, then we're looking at how other ways to access that. So maybe using a computer, having a scribe, having a dictation. Depth perception issues affect STARS and PE, and that's all about the environment. Again, how can we adjust the environment? And visual processing difficulties may affect reading and writing speed. So work around visual processing is really important as well. So I'm nearly got to the end. Finally, please be kind to teachers. It's really hard for teachers. I wouldn't want to be a teacher. I know they're under a lot of pressure, and there's some very good ones out there who are very close to leaving the profession. And I think it's just to go in there with compassion and collaboration. We need to go early on before your child goes up. So probably now's a good time before going up to the next year. Once, as soon as you know their teacher, start that communication with them. Say, can I meet with you? Can we have talk about my child and what we need to do? Keep that communication open. We are all on the same team. We want the best for our children. So that's that. Victoria, over to you.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you very much for that brilliantly comprehensive whirlwind tour.
Yeah.
Which has no doubt resonated with many of you. I wonder, does anybody have questions? Or are you digesting?
Yeah, sorry, that was a lot of information.
Fantastic. And it echoes so many questions raised by our helpline. I mean, it's really helpful to draw the distinction between the legally binding plan and then the plan concocted by a school.
Yeah.
I know that from the helpline, anecdotally speaking, some parents have struggled to secure the legally binding plan. How would you go about that?
It's very difficult because the local authority have the final say in it. If they say, no, we're not, they have the say right at the beginning whether or not they assess. The only other thing to do, unfortunately, is to go through the private route, where you get your own private occupational therapist, you get your own private psychologist, and you get them to write supporting documents. I know, Victoria, you're quite good as the trust, aren't you, to perhaps write a supporting document as well. So perhaps that's a good place to start, first of all, is to ask perhaps the Marfan Trust to write a supporting letter that can go to the LEA. And then if it's still no, then start the other process.
Yeah, we've intervened, hopefully helpfully, quite often, but it's quite a long, tortuous process, though.
It's a very long, torturous process, and they will fight tooth and nail. I mean, there's no budget. This is the problem. There's no money, so they're trying to save the money. And like we said, Marfan syndrome is an invisible illness. We're not, the children generally haven't, because of Marfan, they're not disrupting the classes. So it's the ones generally who shout loudest, who are getting the EHCPs. So it's very difficult.
True of society. That's a shame. They struggle silently and invisibly. I think Joanne has a question.
Yes. Hello. Hi. Hello. I work with Victoria at the Marfan Trust, so thank you. That was brilliant. So I've learnt lots today. But I just have a couple of questions because we often write the letters, but I've never thought about how, so obviously the recommendations you make about the equipment at schools and things like that, I don't know whether, do schools have a budget for things like that? How does that work? And also, do the SEN staff have the ability to assess children, or should we be encouraging people to get more OT input?
I think if you can get OT input within a school, I think that's brilliant. And I think you should definitely ask your SENCO if you can get, either they can refer or you can go to your GP yourself and get it. With the EHCP, you get funding. With a school healthcare plan, there is no funding. But the school do have some money allocated for additional equipment for children with additional needs. So hopefully they can access that. The most I've ever gotten out of it is a beanbag. But again, it's just that, unfortunately, it will be that slight fight you've got to have. But if you have got an OT recommending stuff, it's more likely to happen. Fingers crossed.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Some parents struggle with continuity between school years. So I know of one lady who's actually removed her child. She went through a long, arduous process of setting things in stone, establishing things in one school year, and it worked wonderfully and smoothly until the child transitioned into another year and there was a lack of continuity.
Yeah, it's very difficult, isn't it? I think that's why it's quite good to have quite a comprehensive care plan in place so that that can be continued into the next year, because everything, I'm all for having things written down in concrete just so that everyone's aware of it. And like I said, starting that conversation before they get into that year as well, and making sure that they know how important it is, the fact that, you know, that we get these strategies in place beforehand. But yes, it's very difficult. I will say, don't forget as well, you can come across a lot of roadblocks from schools at times. And I think they've obviously, like I said, they're under a lot of pressure. And we've had it before. We've had heads of year going, no, that's not happening, until we sent an email saying we would welcome a dialogue, a conversation with the senior leadership team and the school governors. And then all of a sudden things started happening. Funny that. Don't forget, the governors are the people who are in the power. they run this. They are the school staff are accountable to the governors. So if you are finding you're getting to the school and you're getting a stop, then you need to go to the governors, and they have their own processes they need to go through as well.
That's a fantastic tactic, because you can easily reach an impasse, and then it just becomes, you can't penetrate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another sort of prevailing problem, I would say, would be PE. Schools are suddenly terrified to allow a child even to participate in something gentle like badminton.
Yeah. I was just looking as strategy. I mean, that's when again perhaps the Marfan Trust can help with letters from consultants, or just saying that, you know, it is okay for this child to do this. I found that generally as a parent, that if you say I am happy for my child to do this and they're happy to do this, they will go along with that. But again, it depends on the school. Unfortunately.
Yeah, and there are big disparities between attitudes between schools. So
yeah, it's very hard.
Does anyone have a question for Natasha? I know one mother wrote in with a few questions, which I think you've integrated into your talk.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can't put my hand up. I'm trying to. I'm trying to put my camera on. But anyway, if I can find it, I'll put it. Oh, there we go.
Hello.
Hello. I have a son who's 14.
Yeah.
And he's going into his GCSE years this September. So next school year. And I wanted to ask about how we prepare, because that was really useful actually, the presentation, but how we prepare him for the GCSE years, because I think it intensifies, doesn't it, very much more.
I think for a lot of children who possibly have chronic fatigue issues as well, I think we need to look at an adapted timetable, and I think schools don't like that. But I think if we want, especially looking at GCSEs, they do a lot of GCSEs. They don't need to do all those GCSEs. They could focus on the topics that perhaps the core subjects, your English, your maths and your science, the subjects they're interested in, and perhaps the ones are not interested in, they need to drop those, and then not rather having the extra pressure of those additional exams. Just focus on the important ones, the ones they really want to do and you feel they should be doing, because they might choose to drop maths otherwise if you give them
it's hard.
It's very difficult. The other thing is about making sure as well, like I said, he's got access to a computer, and for that as well, and that he might be able to get extra time. Movement breaks are really important for somebody with Marfan. Obviously he's having to work very hard, possibly generally talking in general terms, to keep himself upright. That could well be adding to fatigue, which then you add exams on as well, can make it a lot more difficult. That's another way. And just making sure in the exams, again, about seating. It's just I've had for another child who wasn't Marfan, but he has similar sort of traits. We've actually got the school to put in height adjustable desks in the classroom because he's very tall, and he uses an office chair, that height adjustable office chair with arms, and it's just changed how much he attends at school. His attendance was rock bottom, because every time he went to school, he came home at the end of the day, he would just crash out. And the next day, quite often he was too tired to go back to school. He'd be in a lot of pain. As soon as we managed to get the school to put in a height adjustable desk and to put in an office chairs, it made a massive difference. His attendance gone right up. He's doing his GCSEs next year. So but it is fighting the fight to get that.
Yeah, thank you. He has got extra time actually, because with the eye, the eye clinic assessed him in school, which was really good.
Brilliant.
So the eye clinic at Canuck, they sent a guy from Birmingham in, and he assessed him in the classroom, and he's going to go back again. But yeah, he's given him 25% extra time, so that's good.
Fantastic.
But the breaks would be good. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Does anybody else have a question?
Oh, let's see, Holly. Holly's got a hand up. Oh, you're muted, Holly. Victoria, can you unmute people? I don't know.
I'm trying to. I don't invite people to unmute. I thought I had the power. No, I can only. Oh, how frustrating. Holly, could you type it into the chat feed, the question, if I send a in the meantime, I could just quickly ask a question raised by Laura, who said, can you suggest strategies for managing post-exertional malaise or crashing after a full school day?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is to reduce the fatigue at school. So that would be always my first approach. And then when we get home, just let them be. Let them, like I said, when you lay down and you let your whole body rest, that's when you get the most recuperation. So laying on the sofa, watching the telly, doing the computer games while their bodies are fully supported is actually a really good idea. And trying to do that. I'm also an advocate as well for all children to do exercise. They might not like it, but just trying to build up stamina. Gentle walking is really good. I know it's really hard, particularly with teenagers, but anything that's going to build those muscles up to support the joints, which are lacking, it's definitely going to help with maintaining the body upright.
Fabulous.
Oh, I think Susan's got her hand up. I can see.
You're far more vigilant than I am.
Hi, I live in Scotland. I'm English, but I live in Scotland, so we don't have Senko, so I have to sort of find out what the equivalent is. But I've only just found out myself that I have Marfan's. I'm 53. I had to have an aortic dissection, and that's when they sort of tested me. So I've kind of grown up just doing whatever. And now I've just found out that my son's got it. He's going to be 9 in a couple of weeks. We haven't told him yet. So we're going to see the genetic consultants in a couple of weeks. And we're then going to talk to the school when we go back for the new term. We've already told the school, but because obviously the school has no idea, they've never heard of this. Is there any advice that when I go in for that meeting, I mean, they said they don't know whether they should get the school nurse involved. I think they're just as clueless as I am because I'm still learning about Marfans. So is there any advice I can take into that meeting that I might have to tell them or?
Yeah, absolutely. The Marfan Trust have got some really good selection of leaflets. So there's one there on about children accessing education, just generally, which goes through all the symptoms and bits and pieces. So I just recommend sending that ahead of time so they can have a read.
Yeah, I think I've printed some. I think the hospital did print something from the Marfan Trust, and I've actually given it to them. So I think they are doing their research, but I just didn't know what I could take him to the meeting with me as well, because I don't know what questions to ask. I don't know what
Yeah.
support to give Jamie, because he's pretty okay at the moment, so there's no real symptoms.
Okay, so
I don't really know.
yeah, I mean, I've been asking about the school to look out for any things that he seems to be struggling with. So that is with his handwriting. Is he getting tired? Is he one of those children who sticks his head on the desk and his body on the desk because everything is just tired? Is he managing to attend okay to what's on the board? Is he squinting? All that sort of stuff. Have you noticed anything as a parent about, that he might be struggling with at school?
Not really. He's doing quite well at school. I mean, recently, obviously, in September I was taken into hospital, and I was in for 7 weeks, and he seemed to go downhill a bit from there. But that's because Dad didn't do the routine. Dad was in and out of the hospital, and the teacher did call him to say that he was sleeping on the desk and stuff like that. But I think that's because his dad kept him up too late.
Yeah, maybe a bit of stress going on there for him.
Yeah, a bit stressful. So apparently he's done well since I've been home, and he's got a lot better. But he does get quite tired. Like, he has to do, even in primary school, he has to do homework, and then he gets quite frustrated with the home. But I'm quite like, come on, you just got to do it, get on with it, do it quickly, and it'll be done. So maybe I'm a little bit too hard on him. Maybe he is getting that fatigue.
I think I mean, kids are at school for 6 hours a day, aren't they? And all that time they're in plastic chairs or they're running around. And that is perhaps a conversation to have with the school and just say, could we just try without homework for a bit? I think primary school homework especially is not going to disrupt his education if he doesn't do homework. And it'll just give him a chance to, when he gets home, just to properly rest. And that's another thing about having an adapted curriculum, is about perhaps that even for secondary school kids, especially when they give them quite a lot and they get home and they have dinner, and then you're like, right, come on, do some homework. And they're just exhausted, and it's absolutely exhausting. And it creates a massive conflict between you and your child, because they don't really want to do it. They're just tired. They just want to go and either to bed or to go and, play, do something else. So perhaps that might be just something to try to start with, just saying, can we just cut out the homework and just see how he is, and then perhaps introduce it in as and when. I know I've had schools before who said, right, okay, well, can you just say you're going to do 20 minutes tonight? And I've just had to explain to them that you can't put an arbitrary number on it, because one day that child might be really tired and another day they're not. So perhaps we're not saying no to any homework. We're just saying, we'll ask the child each night about, how do you feel? Do you feel you can do this homework right now? And if they can't, fair enough.
Yeah. Okay.
Kids are going to love me. Schools are going to hate me.
Yeah, and he hates PE, so he's like, just tell him I can't do PE.
I mean, it might be the PE. If he's having trouble keeping up with his peers, I had this with my son on sports day. Was the most dreaded day of his year. He did the reception sports day, never again, because he was having to compete with all his other friends. He was trying his very hardest, and because his joints were all wobbly, he struggled. He couldn't keep up with them. And he was absolutely mortified at the fact he was coming last to everything. And I went, you know what? Let's not do sports day anymore. And we just didn't do sports day. He still took part in PE lessons and stuff like that. But the thought of all the parents and everybody else watching him coming last and everything was just too much. And it's just like, well, what's the point? Let's just take it out of the equation. And they gave him a job where he went round and did the scores. He collected all the scores, and he helped out in different things instead. So there's a way of adapting things to so he can still participate, but in his own way. But that's probably why he hates PE, because it's so much more difficult for him. He's missing connective tissue in his body. There's a real basic level of it. He's missing connective tissue. So everything he's doing, he's having to work so much harder to keep his body upright and moving.
Yeah, I know that feeling right now.
I bet you're looking back as an adult as well, now looking back to when you were at school, going, that makes sense, and that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Right.
Okay, Laura has a question. Hello, Laura.
Hey, sorry, figured out how to start the video and unmute myself. Really, really interesting to hear the advice and your insights, Natasha. But I'd love to know whether, in your experience, if you've seen a correlation between Marfan syndrome and sensory processing differences. Like, for example, children who are sensory seeking or avoidant. So my son has Marfan syndrome and shows some signs of sensory sensitivities. I'm just wondering if it's something you've come across.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to separate, because there's a lot of children with sensory processing problems. And my husband and my son, and they don't like labels, and we chop out labels. So I think I don't know if there isn't a direct link between Marfan syndrome and sensory processing, because I know it's been brought up. I was looking on the Facebook group. I haven't been there for a while, but I know there's talk about autism as well, and Marfan syndrome, and there is a connection between EDS, so Ehlers-Danios syndrome, and that, but there isn't, as at the moment, the research hasn't been done associating the two together. In my experience, I haven't noticed a greater increase, but it could be, you know, there's lots of layers. It could well be that Marfan and then sensory processing on top as well, and sensory seeking. Yeah.
And Nix has asked, was there a difference between how your children show symptoms in school?
Yeah, I have my son is definitely more affected than my daughter. My daughter is like me, and you wouldn't really know when she was younger, whereas my son had terrible joint problems. He used to wake up in the night screaming in pain. We had to do Calpol regularly to get him through the night, sort of thing. Because basically, when you rest at night, your joints basically relax, and his joints were almost dislocating almost a bit, so it was causing a lot of problems. So so even within my own two children, there was quite a dramatic difference to how they presented and at school. So we had, for his education and health plan, was a lot more detailed and a lot more, if this happens, this needs to happen. Whereas with my daughter, it was a lot more straightforward. We just kept it very basic for her.
And I think Laura's asked, what should educators be aware of in terms of physical safety or overexertion in children with Marfan?
I think they just need to they need to educate themselves, and I know that's really hard. They've got so much going on, but just to, you know, when we give the leaflets, can educators read the leaflets? And just be aware. And I think having a really good narrative with the parents are the most invested in their children being well and engaging in the education, and they will be the ones to say, we want them to do this, but we don't want to do that. And I think it's really important to listen to parents about what they want their child doing and not doing. And it's that thing, like I said, you know, we want children to be exercising, we want them doing stuff. It's just making sure they're doing the right things.
Brilliant. And
sorry, can I just add to what Natasha was saying? I think for young children, for little ones, you know, up to the age of about 10, I think they can, if they're fit and well to do the activities, they can pretty much join in with, because they're not going to be pushing themselves to those sort of competitive levels. So I think for little children, it's okay to let them go off and do what they want to do. It's when they get a bit older that, you know, some of the symptoms become a bit more evident, and they need to you need to start bringing in those limitations.
I think it's, especially with teenage boys playing competitive games when they're like men, they're just basically men barreling into men, isn't it? And that's a lot more risk with being struck by across the chest and the joints and everything else. But yes, you're absolutely right. When they're little, that it is a lot more gentle anyway, the PE and the sports.
And Laura's asked a good question. And what's the best way to balance support without drawing unwanted attention to the child or making them feel different?
Yeah, I mean, that's the really difficult thing, isn't it? I think as well, trying to integrate whatever you're doing for that child within the school lesson anyway. So what I mean is, like with my son being in the beanbag, that was reading time. Everybody was reading. So he was reading. It just happened he was on the beanbag and they weren't. And then occasionally some other children went on the beanbag. So it wasn't just his beanbag, it was the class beanbag, but he got the priority of it when they did the reading. And I think just, yeah, it's very difficult. I did have one child I worked with where the PE staff were like, you can't do that, can you? Because your medical thing, come on, don't everyone else do this, but he needs to do this over there. And you're just like, no. So, and it's just about, again, educating educators, just saying, you know, please try not to identify these children as being different. They don't want to be different, but it is a very hard thing to do. I mean, especially we're talking about in lessons, supportive seating and desks. It is going to be different. They are going to be different from their peers. But things like pens, you know, using different size pens and stuff, that shouldn't be a biggie, because a lot of the children, I think a lot of them do use pens, bigger pens now, to support your grip when you first start learning to write. but it is a very difficult line to tread.
Oh, Laura.
Sorry, me again. And please, everybody else jump in if I'm just sort of commandeering. But you mentioned about sort of trying not to identify the child as different or to encourage educators not to do it. So my child will join a new school, and one of the things that they've asked is whether he'd like to introduce his condition to his peers. Now, this has been asked by his current school as well, and he does not wish to do that. Do you have any advice on how to sort of navigate that? I don't really know.
That's a really odd thing to do. That's a really odd thing to do. It's really private and personal. And, you know, why would they ask the child to do that? It's just, yeah, I that feels very misguided. Somebody's very misguided with that interpretation how to do things. I would just say that, you know, no.
I think it's partly because he's got an adaptive schedule. He's been diagnosed with chronic fatigue, so he's doing reduced school hours.
Yeah.
And of course, I said, well, you know, he's getting older now, people are noticing, and I just thought, is this just me feeling like I don't think that's really appropriate? If he wanted to, that's okay, but he doesn't want to. So I don't really know how to support him in that or to speak to the school about it, because I just think it's a bit of an odd request.
It is a very odd request, and it goes against all sorts of data protection, I'm sure. But yeah, I just, it's yes. I mean, so what if he's got a different schedule? I mean, so what? I think school's very much like everyone to be doing the same thing so that it's all very consistent, and it's not. And we know from the legislation I mentioned, they've got to make reasonable adjustments, and I'm sure you had to fight for the adapted timetable tooth and nail. Yeah. So they don't have to. He doesn't have to announce it to anybody. He doesn't have to justify it to anybody. Not at all. If he doesn't want to. Yeah.
I think I might have got my sound working.
Hey, hi Holly.
Yeah, but it's working now. I was just going to ask. So my daughter's 2. She's already showing signs of Marfan, and she's her aorta's already widening, and she's got orthotics, and so she'll be joining primary school in about a year and a half. Is there anything that I should start straight away from reception to say these are sort of the requirements we need? Because obviously, like you say, when they're young and they're just throwing themselves on chairs, throwing themselves on this, is it just the information that the teachers need, or do we need to start anything now, if that makes sense?
I think we just, I would give them the information about Marfan syndrome and the things to look out for. And for them to be aware of. And, you know, I go on about fatigue a lot, but I do think it's something very underrated for Marfan patients. Is the fact, I think we're just still used to the fact we're tired, and we just compensate, but to our own detriment in some ways. So I think it's just making them aware about the fact that she might need additional support at school in regard to seating, or she might need extra breaks, or one of the things I used to do for one child I used to see is they sitting for assembly, they sit on the hard wooden floor cross-legged, and for him it was excruciatingly painful because he's pushing against all this hard floor in the assembly. So it's just a case of, can they sit on the chair at the side? Yes, and that was it. So it's just things to bear in mind like that. So chat to your daughter when she starts there. How was school, you know, and what was assembly like? And she might go, yeah, I don't like it. And it might be that she doesn't like it because she sat on a very hard floor and it's very uncomfortable. So it's all those little adjustments that that could be made. But it's very hard because, like I said, all Marfan children can present very differently. And what one's difficult for one wouldn't be difficult for another. So it's just being very aware of her and her needs. I mean, if she's got the heart, but has she got joint problems as well?
Yeah, I mean, when she's tired now, when I pick her up from nursery, she'll walk like 3 meters, slam flat on her face. We'll walk 3 meters, and her feet are just like, you can see her knees going in, and her feet are just like, she just can't keep one in front of the other.
Yeah.
So I know as soon, and when she's at home, she'll have a nap at 9 in the morning. She's fine until about 5, and then she crashes. Yeah. But at school, like when she's at school, she'll, like after being there for half an hour, she'll just be asleep on her desk with her head. Yeah.
And it might be even looking at, I mean, children don't have to start school until they're 5 years old anyway. So it might be that, and the schools won't like it again, but perhaps she does half days, you know, to start where she just does half days and just let her come home, start building up that strength and stamina. Because she, you know, it will increase the longer she goes to school, but it's going to be a massive shock even with going to nursery, having to go to a school where it's a lot more formal, a lot more structured. So perhaps she just goes for half days for the first year she's there, and then gradually increase it from there.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good shout.
I think Ruth has a question. Her hand's raised.
Yeah, thank you. I found the hand now as well. Yeah, I have one more question, and it's because my son Sam is waiting for operation on his feet, because of the flat feet thing, because they're very turned in. We hoped it would start before his GCSE year, but there's some crisis in orthopedic pediatrics at the moment, and so he's still waiting. Is there any advice on? I'm assuming it will just happen in the middle of the study for his GCSEs, about how to navigate that, and then being in a wheelchair for a considerable amount of time, and then doing his GCSEs as well.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully the school will make a lot of adjustments for him. I mean, could he do online classes? That's the other thing. Could they do Zoom? All school classrooms now are computers. They've got computers. They've got cameras. They use it all the time with children. So it's about suggesting, and they probably go, no, we can't do that, but they could. So it's about pushing their boundaries and going, actually, you know, at the moment it's too, you know, he's too unwell. He can't come to school. He wishes to engage in the lessons. Could we Zoom, or could you send the work home and do it that way? The other thing is when he's going between classes, because he's in secondary school, he could leave early. So between classes, he goes out in his wheelchair before then. So he's not going to be in the hustle and bustle of corridors, which, as I'm sure we all remember from secondary school, is bonkers. So things like that, he can, you know, passes for the fact that if he is finding it too difficult, he can leave the classroom and go somewhere else. But I would very much focus on how he can access education when at home in that recuperating period, rather than trying to push him back too early because he doesn't want to miss his education. About making sure they're supporting him to access the information and the education he would be getting if he was at school.
Thank you.
I'm searching in the chat feed. We've addressed those questions.
Brilliant.
Cannot see a raised hand. Oh, Laura.
Hey, sorry, one more from me. Just curious to know your thoughts, Natasha, on sitting in the W position. Now, this is a position that my son has sat in since he was very little. Schools have really struggled to allow him seating, as you mentioned, in assemblies, during floor time. Seems to always get forgotten about. You know, he's been forced to sit cross-legged, which he absolutely cannot do for love nor money. And recently the school sort of intervened without speaking to me and said, you know, we've noticed he's sitting W when he is on the floor in the, you know, in classroom time. I've asked the teacher just to give him a signal to move out of that position. And I just wrote to her and I said, you know, it's really like postural endurance for Noah is really difficult. Like his body's just not built like ours. He doesn't sit like that for hours on end. And whilst it might not be the optimal position, you know, she seemed to have a whole sort of school of thought around it. I just said for him, if that's what helps him sit, I'm okay with it. I'd rather you didn't single him out and make gestures. Do you have, you know, any feelings about the W position, I guess, is the question.
The reason he's sitting in the W position is because it's the only way he can support his body. So he's spreading his base nice and wide. It's supporting his body, keeping his torso upright, and that's the only way he can stay upright. And if he didn't do that, he'd be lying on the floor, basically. Yeah. So they either let him do it. I mean, physiotherapists are definitely no W sitting, because it pulls out the hips. It's not great. But I think the school need to look at alternative seating for him. If they're worried about it, why are they not providing seating that means he's not in the W sitting? Because that's the only way he can support his body, which shows he's uncomfortable. So I think, they should be looking at some sort of seating there, and perhaps, again, getting an OT involved from local authority to come and do assessment at school, and whether or not they need to provide him with some sort of seat or something to give him that support.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Anyone else with questions? I can't see anything.
I've bombarded you all with tons of information. Sorry about that. You need to all go away and digest it.
It's been absolutely phenomenal. And I love the way you talk about the core position and the W position. You explain I don't know, the physicality of everything. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. I love my job. I'm an OT and I absolutely love being an OT. It's the best job in the world. And because you can just make such a difference. And once you understand the theory behind why people are doing things, you're like, it's so obvious. And I love the fact that I can come and offer practical strategies. And yeah, it's just fighting the education system a bit. It makes it very difficult.
That's what patients struggle with more than anything. I mean,
Yeah.
the heart surgery and everything like that, but it's the practical day-to-day things. It's everyday living, the everyday routine, walking, everything.
Yeah, there's so many things we can do to support our children and our young people to make it easier for them. And so and you know, if you're not worrying about how your body's tired or how it's feeling, you can concentrate on the education then. It's, you know, and get things done. And I'm a big fan of adapted curriculums, adapted timetables, so that children aren't, you know, having to do this. You must be here from 8:30 until 3:30. You know, about why do they have to, you know, if they can do a shorter curriculum, perhaps drop some GCSEs, you know, and that means that they can achieve really well on the ones they really want to achieve in. Do that. We need to be much more fluid, and I think that's why it's good to know about the legislation, because like I said, I've had it many times where schools have gone, no, we don't do a permanent adapted timetable, we only do it for a short time. And we've gone back going, I think you're fine from the legislation, you do it for as long as need be. And you know, Marfan's patients, then it's not going to, like, they do it for 6 months, an adapted timetable, and after 6 months, wow, they no longer got Marfan syndrome. They're always going to have Marfan syndrome. And it's really important we're teaching our children at school how to adapt, so they're ready for the workplace. They're going to work one day. They're going to be out in the working world. And we need to be able to empower them to know that, okay, so when I go and work for that company, I probably shouldn't do that job, but I could do this job. And perhaps I could have this, you know, if I have this seating, they can go in prepared. They can be their own advocates. I'm really passionate about children becoming their own advocates for what they can and can't do.
We'd like to invite you to our information day and perhaps speak on advocacy. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, no problem.
No, carry on.
I was going to say as well, just so everyone's aware, we are going to be running a session, aren't we, about adults as well. So this is, yes. In my career, I've been very fortunate. I've worked with children and adults. So it's another area I'm really intrigued and I'm really passionate about, is about, again, about how adults can access everything, all their occupations. So whatever they might be.
Thank you so much. And your enthusiasm is really infectious. This is brilliant. Thank you. And if a question occurs to somebody sort of later on in the evening, feel free to email our helpline.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, and it's fine. I'm in communication with Victoria quite a lot now, so we can, anything we can help with, I'm more than happy to.
Thank you so much, Natasha, and thank you to everyone who came.